All right, let's do it. Evoker, the last elite spec preview before we get into the beta. So we talked about this a lot in the blog. You know, you probably watched a video. So first things first, you pick an element to specialize in. You do that on the F5 slot here. Similar mechanic to how the amalgam skills work, where it is kind of selectable profession skill. And here we can choose from, you know, the fox or the otter or the hare or the toad. Let's just give them the time that they deserve here on the screen. So here's the fiery fox, of course. Water otter. The air hare. And of course the earth toad. So the idea here is that you pick an element to specialize in, and this is going to do a few things. First of all, there will be some traits and utility skills that care about your specialized element. We'll get to those in a little bit. They're also going to see a significantly reduced recharge time of the element you specialize in. So here I am specialized in fire. So when I swap out of fire, you're going to see it goes on the short recharge time that all of the other attunements go on. This is a number that we're definitely playing around with, trying to find like the right balance between this really feels like you have more flexibility. Like obviously people know fresh air, the trait, just gives you a lot more flexibility in how you use your air skills, when you need to use your air skills, because you can kind of always go back. Similar idea here. There are a number of traits, obviously, that trigger when you enter an attunement. Some of these are balanced for the Weaver profession in that they cannot trigger when you attune to the same element, and those traits specifically will have a internal cooldown when you have the specialized element. So if I have, for example, Healing Ripple is the example in the water trait line, the one that says heal when you swap to water, that will not be able to trigger every single time if you are quickly swapping in and out of water, because it might be a little bit too powerful, but it will still have more, there will be increased access to that because you can just wait a little bit longer, or you know, it's going to be every other time that you swap into water, or every third time depending on how quickly you are swapping. Keeping a pretty close eye on how that plays. You know, is this short recharge the right number? It fit pretty well with just how attunement mechanics work already, so that was kind of the baseline. But it could be a little bit longer. Maybe the traits don't need internal cooldowns then. But that's something that we'll be looking for a lot of feedback on during the beta. But for now, it is just your specialized element will always have this low recharge time. And that, again, just gives you a lot of extra flexibility. I think Dagger with Air is a great example of this, where Shocking Aura, Ride the Lightning, Updraft, these are all skills that are pretty situational. So if you swap out of air and then you don't have access to those for like 10 seconds or 8 seconds or whatever your attunement recharge is and how much alacrity you have, you know, that there's so many variables that go in, but you have that longer window of opportunity for like enemies to capitalize on, oh, I know there's no Shocking Aura available, but now you can have a much lower recharge and always be able to go back to those utility focused skills, or, you know, always go back to the auto attack that you like the most as you use the other skills in your build. So last up we have the familiar. Obviously we get a familiar when we specialize in an element, and the way that this works is it's obviously not like a ranger pet or a mechanist mech. It is intended to be more of like a companion combatant, where we're really trying to capture the feeling of, you know, this familiar kind of fighting alongside of you. So as you, the way that it works is using a weapon skill is going to start charging up this meter, and we talked about this a lot in the blog too. Here I used an air skill with my Firefox, so it gave me 1 charge. But if I go back to fire attunement and I use a fire skill, that's going to give me 2 charges toward my, we're calling it the basic skill. We see another note here about an empowered skill. We'll get to that pretty soon. But the idea is, again, you can charge up your familiar skill more quickly, and then that will, you know, as you're fighting, build up your familiar's power. It can contribute a attack as well. So you can see a nice little fireball. We'll talk exactly about these skills. There's still a little bit more to explain about how this charging mechanic works. Currently, for the beta, it will not charge up when you're using an auto attack. and it will not charge when you use a flip skill. And the goal here is that trying to normalize the rate gain across different weapons a bit better. Obviously, comparing something like Scepter, something like Staff with Fire, the auto attack speed is significantly different. So it would blow out pretty heavily if you got, obviously if you got 2 from using an auto attack. It could use 1. This is still something that we're thinking about a lot. Whether or not there should be charge from using utility skills, whether it should be charge at a reduced charge for auto attacks, maybe even give like half of a charge, for example. So we'll definitely be looking for feedback on this in the beta. But for the baseline, the first implementation is that as you use basically your 2 through 5 skills, that is going to contribute charge to your familiar's basic attack. So you will be using your skills, and then the familiar will power up here, and we're going to see firing off Ignite here. From the Firefox. This is just shooting out a burning projectile, and the idea is that each time you strike the same enemy in quick succession, it's a pretty generous window, so quick is kind of a misnomer. I think it's like a 10-second window to hit the same target. That will inflict additional burning. So I'm just going to start cheating and have infinite energy here, infinite charge, and so we will kind of start from 0. It did not quite start from 0. But we see here that inflicting 1 burning, then 2 burning, then 3 burning on the 3rd hit, and after we use the basic skill 3 times, so I hope you guys like counting to 3 because you can count to 3 in your fire attunement, and then count to 3 as you use the basic skill to the empowered skill, and that will then unlock the empowered skill of the familiar. The idea is that you can then conjure it into the world, and it will form a much more powerful attack. So here we see Conflagration, kind of the ultimate skill of the Firefox, is that it will spawn into the world, attack your targeted enemy, inflicting burning, and this will then also spread burning on that target to nearby enemies. So kind of an epidemic effect, but only for burning. So we see here, build up that burning on this target, then we're going to hit with Conflagration. That's going to get a pretty big burn spread, assuming you hit everything. And then the idea here is that there is a cap on how much burning you could do. We thought that applying 1,500 stacks of burning might be too much. So here we see the maximum stack count is 9. It's going to be a little bit lower in competitive modes as well. And this is, again, just another thing that we're keeping a pretty close eye on. Like, we want the skill to feel really strong. Transferring 9 stacks or copying 9 stacks of burning to nearby enemies is pretty strong. But, maybe it could be a little bit higher. We'll see as we get further into the beta. And then once you have used the empowered skill, we see the center meter reset back to 0, and the familiar will kind of come back to its floaty hover state. So notably, the familiar will just follow you around in this state. It'll just, float, chasing you around the world, a companion for your adventures. Importantly, when you activate the basic skill, the familiar will find you wherever you are, just to make sure that it's in the right position. It will kind of teleport over to you and make sure that, this is firing off a projectile with a certain range. We want to make sure that it is based pretty closely to your range, and we'll see this on a number of other skills as well, but the familiar will always come to your location. Notably, if you do get really far away, the familiar didn't get far enough away, but if you get far enough away, it will eventually just teleport to you again. Kind of a nice catch-up mechanic here, similar to how a lot of pets work as well. But most importantly, this is not a ranger pet, it's not a mechanist mech, it's not something that is attackable or in the world. It is a familiar, ally combatant that is powered up through your own weapon skills. So that is the Firefox. We saw Ignite and Conflagration. So let's go ahead and move into the Water Otter next. Notably, we will see quite a bit of flexibility on this spec. I'd argue that it rivals Amalgam, if not overtakes it, with the amount of flexibility in this profession based off which element you choose to specialize in. Obviously, we're going to see a lot more condition damage from fire. We'll see a lot of heals and supportive stuff from water, strike damage, power damage coming out from the air, hair, and more of that bulky bruiser type playstyle from the Earth Toad. Let's go ahead and move into the Otter. So basic skill here, we're just going to have Splash. This is going to throw out a few healing projectiles. nearby allies. That's a little bit of healing, a little bit of regeneration there. Nothing too crazy, but just a nice solid healing skill. Then once we build up to that empowered skill, we're going to see Buoyant Deluge. This is a pretty powerful skill, does a lot of things. So we see here that we're going to just, let's take a look at what the otter actually does here. It's a ground target skill. I'll pick the area. Let's throw it on our allies. We want to heal them. See the otter kind of come in, play around with a little bit of water stuff, and then fire off a big ball of healing water. You know, mostly healing water, but it does also have some offensive components here. This skill's really fun. I love the animation of this skill so much. But we see here that this is going to heal these allies, create a water field. This is going to pulse some regeneration as well, very powerful with something like cleansing water. And then also remove some conditions. And then the extra bonus here is when you throw it on enemies, generally you're going to be throwing it on allies to heal them. But if you also have overlapping enemies, we're going to see that bubble kind of traps those enemies inside, doing a stun. So a really powerful skill, does quite a few things. Quite, you know, a lot of these empowered skills, they are a little bit less accessible when you are not given infinite charge. So they are going to be all super impactful, very powerful skills. Just give some more screen time to the otter. It's got a nice little shell necklace. Next up, we have the air hare. This one's going to be, again, more strike damage focused, starting off with the zap. It's just going to be a ground target damage skill. See some damage. We see this mark being applied. The way that this works is that it will mark enemies to take increased damage from your critical strikes. It won't augment ally critical strikes, but your own critical strikes will get a nice little damage bonus here. So you will be wanting to continuously zap your enemies in order to keep that up, or it will rather create some more bursty windows of opportunity. We really need a close-up on this animation as well. We see the hare doing a little bit of spell casting, does a little backflip to fire off that burst of lightning. And that eventually is going to flip over into Lightning Blitz. This is going to be just a big strike damage skill. The idea is that the hare, you summon the hare and it kind of dashes so quickly between your enemies to the point that it might actually be teleporting. But that is just going to be doing guaranteed critical damage on every strike, so that plays really nicely into the zap debuff, obviously. But this will kind of dash between enemies. If there is only a single enemy, we will of course see the hare continue to strike that single enemy. And kind of power up, doing a bunch of strikes, bunch of damage, and then again coming back to the baseline of floating next to you. Some big damage coming out from, you know, assuming you have real equipment equipped that has power, precision, and ferocity. I guess you don't need precision for that skill, but I would recommend a lot of power and ferocity instead of nothing. And last but not least, we have the Earth Toad. Again, leaning more into like this bruisery defensive playstyle, a little bit of crowd control, or a lot of crowd control, as we'll see. I'll take a quick water break, though, as we watch the marvel that is the Earth Toad. All right, so we're going to start off with Calcify. And the idea here is that it's just going to be a quick casting interrupt, short-ish days. I see again the toad will teleport on top of you to make sure that it is hitting those nearby enemies. If you do strike an enemy that is using a skill, this is also going to give you a bit of barrier. So a nice little defensive tool. A little bit of strike damage on this, but the main focus is again that crowd control and that defensive component as well. Look at this up a few more times. Earth Toad doing some magic, firing out some rocks. And that is going to flip over into Seismic Impact. This is going to be that big crowd control moment. We're going to see The toad comes in, kind of stomps on the ground. The first hit here is going to knock down enemies, all going to create this ring of earth, similar to like the ring of warding mechanics that we've seen in a few places where enemies cannot cross through unless they do have stability, but it is kind of that earthen cage to keep enemies trapped inside. And then we did see a bit of damage, bleeding, cripple, coming out on the second stomp there as well. So just that pretty solid bruiser skill. We see that this area is also going to give protection to nearby allies, including yourself. So again, big crowd control, a little bit of damage, and a nice little defensive skill is, again, the theme of the Earth Toad. Let's see it one more time. Seismic impact. And the toad will come back to follow you around. So that's the gist of the familiar mechanic. Obviously, like I said, we're still looking for a lot of feedback around like charge rates and skill impact levels. And there's a lot of ways that we can tune this mechanic, as we talked about already. It's like, should auto attacks count? Should utility skills count? Should flip skills count? Should it be faster? Should it be slower? The beta is going to give us a lot of this information, and all you guys feedback in the chat and the beta, playing the beta, is going to give us kind of the right balance of these things, such that it feels like this is a fairly active companion fighting alongside you. So next up, we can hop into the utility skills. We'll start with the healing skill with this lovely image of the otter getting a pat on its head. Rejuvenate. So this is just going to be a pretty short cooldown healing skill. Nothing too crazy. It's going to heal you, and it is going to give you a charge, full charge of your familiar basic skill. So this will just kind of accelerate your building toward that empower skill just a little bit, in addition to obviously giving you that healing skill. Nothing too crazy, but some nice visuals. This one doesn't really care what your familiar is. The elite skill doesn't care what your familiar is either, but now we'll take a look at these utility skills that do have a slight amount of caring about what your utility skill or what your specialized element is. I'm going to swap back to the Fox because the first thing we're going to talk about is Fox's Fury. This is going to give some defense, or some offensive boons rather. Still, my mind was stuck in the Toad land of defense, but here we are with Fox's Fury. This is going to give some might, some fury to your nearby allies, and then you're going to attack an enemy, do some damage, and do some burning. And the damage and burning here is going to scale based off how many might stacks you have. So we have a few different thresholds here. If you have less than 10 might, you're going to get kind of the weakest version of the skill. And between 10 and 20 might, you get the middle version of the skill. And then if you want the big damage, the big burning, you're going to want to have 25 might stacks, as you probably do as you're running around in raids or open world PvE or anything like that. Notably, the might from this skill will count first. It's not going to be enough on its own to get you over that first threshold, but if you just have a couple of might stacks lying around, you can always at least get the middle value of the skill. And assuming you have, say, 12 might, 13 might is over 20 might, then you can get the full value of the skill as you fire it off. And for anyone reading the skill fact as I'm rambling here, we see that if fire is the specialized element, this skill will be the stun break. That's kind of the baseline mechanic that we've implemented for all of the utility skills here. Your specialized element will control which of these skills is your stun break. We think that there still needs to be a little bit more here. Didn't quite get in for the beta, but there is going to likely be, we're already kind of looking ahead toward making the specialized element kind of pump up these skills even a bit more than just having that stun break component. So keep that in mind as you are giving feedback around these skills. If there's anything that you have in mind, you know, should it just be more damage, more burning? Maybe that makes sense for this one. Maybe it should do something else. Maybe it could give you more might stacks so you hit that second threshold, third threshold a bit easier. That is something that we are considering moving forward. It's just for the beta, the specialized element will make the associated utility skill into a stun break. So next up, we'll take a look at the Otter's Compassion. Notably, these are meditations. Forgot to mention that, but anyone who can read the skill facts will know that kind of fits the theme pretty well. Like, you know, the spirits of the wild, and you're kind of communing with these elemental familiars. Meditation fits pretty well, and you know, there's at least one relic that cares about meditations. So maybe you take that, get a little bit of extra protection. Here we see Otter's Compassion. Again, this will be the stun break if you have the Otter. Only for yourself, not for allies. But the way this skill works is that it will convert conditions on yourself and nearby allies, specifically into regeneration. That is important once we get into the traits. Obviously, maybe cleansing water exists as well. So you can remove 5 conditions, gain 5 stacks of regen, which obviously stacks in duration, but it will give you 5 instances of regen, which could then trigger cleansing water 5 more times. And that's kind of insane when you think about it. It could be a cleanse 10. But just a powerful, defensive Condi removal, a little bit of healing from that regen, but a, pretty straightforward water-associated skill. Show that. There's a little burst of water energy coming out here as you remove conditions from your allies. Next up, it doesn't really matter they specialize because we're not showing off the stun component. It is there, but we do like to have the hair here because the hair, again, is the best of the familiars, and there is no argument for any of the other 3, except they're all good. Hair's agility. That's going to be a ground target, mobility skill, evasion, dash. You see, pretty good distance. Not super long range, but reasonable amount that you can kind of escape. It's going to be evading attacks, and it's also going to give you stacks of this Venom-esque buff called Hair's Agility, named after the skill. This is going to cause your next attacks to inflict chain lightning. Let me see here, just getting a little bit extra of that damage from the chain lightning strikes being generated from this buff. We'll see this buff again when we get into the traits, but it is, again, going to be a pretty decent chunk of damage coming out, so kind of a hybrid defensive and offensive skill here. Nice little lightning effects. You're not quite as fast as the hair, you don't get to teleport across the entire map, but you can evade attacks as you dash and get that buff. Again, this will be a stun break if you have the hair. Last up, we have Toad's Fortitude. This is going to be more of that defensive skill again, but it will have some offensive components. We see some bleeding on there. We see protection. We see a bit of damage as well. This is going to be a short duration block, so you're going to want to use this at the right time, block the key attacks, and then this will explode outward, this kind of earthen barrier, explode outward, do some damage, do some bleeding, and also grants you protection, assuming you aren't interrupted by some sort of unblockable crowd control. And of course, if you do have the earthen specialized element, this will be a stun break. Last up, we have the elite skill. So what could it do? You might get a hint from the icon. The idea is that this will kind of give you access to all of the familiars, and you guys might have noticed this in the teaser video that was kind of used at the end of the Evoker segment. You could kind of see the familiars starting to come together. The idea is you ground target the skill, then the familiars will all kind of do their attack around that area. Obviously there were no enemies there, so Fox and Hare didn't show themselves, but let's use it on some actual enemies. Toad will come in first, set up with that earthen cage, then the Otter's going to toss that water ball on top, get that stun. Fox and Hare will come in, and they're set up to hit all their damage, so that's what they're going to do. Obviously you get the healing from this, you get the protection from this potentially, you get all the things from this. It's an elite skill, it does it all, and just a really powerful effect where it also gives you access to kind of all of these familiars that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. So a very... I don't know what word I'm looking for. This gives you a lot of different types of value all at the same time. So you can use this on your allies, giving that healing from the water ball, giving that protection from the earth toad, but maximum value is going to be somewhere where there are enemies and allies at the same spot. So again, these are just using all those powered skills. We have Conflagration, we have Seismic Impact, we have Buoyant Deluge, and Lightning Blitz are all going to be triggered here as we get trolled by skill retargeting. But here we go, using it at the proper location. We see all the familiars coming in and doing their thing. Now, take a quick break for water, and we're going to talk about the traits. Taylor, what is your favorite of the familiars?
Definitely the Toad. Really looking to do an Earth Evoker, put my hammer on, swing around. Very dirt, mud focused. Definitely the best one by far.
Yeah, I see how it is. All right, let's put on some random traits. Wait, flashing. Here we go. This explains all the things that we already explained. You can scroll through this one, see all the basic skills, see all the empowered skills, all that good stuff. But let's talk about traits that actually do something. So here's kind of the first of a handful of traits that care which element you are specialized in. This is enhanced potency. It's going to improve a boon based off that choice. So where we see might giving you additional condition damage per stack, regeneration going to have that increased healing. That is notably regeneration will heal for more, not an outgoing healing bonus. Hair is going to give you that super fury, increased critical chance while you have fury, and the earth toad will cause your protection to do reduced condition damage as well as strike damage. So again, it's kind of like a stat stick trait that just leans into defining which of these playstyles that you selected based off your element: conti damage, healing, strike damage, defense. Next up, we have Familiar's Prowess. That's a spoiler from the top GM affecting this. We did see this activating or triggering every time that we used a familiar skill. This is just going to be, again, kind of more of that bread and butter, build-defining bonus effect. We see every time we use a familiar skill, whether it is that basic skill or the empowered skill, we will get a buff on our bar for a bit of time, increased condition damage, increased outgoing healing, increased strike damage, or reduced incoming strike damage, again, based off your familiar. We're going to move into the adept traits. So this is going to be kind of an air-focused trait. There's going to be 4 of these, one for each element. What a surprise! Where each of these care about your specialized element in that they will be a bit more powerful if you have the matching familiar. So here we see that every time we use a familiar skill, we're going to be getting stacks of that chain lightning buff that we saw on the utility skill as well. So that's going to be a single stack, also going to have some fury in there, but if you have the hair, you're going to get 2 stacks of this buff, so basically double effectiveness of this chain lightning buff. Can move into the bottom trait, which is going to be more of that earth-focused trait, earth and fortification, gain protection when you disable an enemy, and again, basically double effectiveness here if you are channeling, or if you are evoking the toad. And then in the center, so we'll see the fire and water traits in the master tier. Then in the center, we're going to see kind of a hybrid trait that is valuable to both the other 2 elements. So here we see blazing restoration when you use the healing skill, that lower cooldown Evoker healing skill. We're going to do a bit of regen AoE and a bit of burning AoE. This will be important for either of those 2 traits that we will see basically right now. Starting with Fiery Might, this is going to be increased burn damage. So again, leaning into that condition damage, a lot of burning going to be coming out from the fire specialized evokers. And then you're also going to gain might anytime that you inflict burning with a very short cooldown to make sure that it's not completely insane. But as we see here, that might duration is going to be basically doubled when you have the Fox, so just giving more opportunity to stack up that might.
Very important note here that both this trait and the Familiar's Prowess bonus should work with Inferno, correct?
I believe that is correct. If it's not, I'll go double check after this trade, but we'll make sure that it does.
The Familiar's Prowess bonus says plus 10% condition damage, but that is like damage from conditions. So even when you have Inferno, it is still a condition despite scaling with power. So you will have increased damage on it.
That is a good note, because Inferno, we might see some Infernos with the Fox. Next up, we have the water trait, Soothing Evasion. This is again going to be more of that healing focus trait. Grant regen to allies on dodge, and then when you grant allies regeneration, you're going to be healing them. We can see here that that healing is a bit more potent when you have the otter. Yet another trait that potentially heals on dodge roll because you will dodge, grant regeneration, then that regeneration will heal your allies. And then last up, the kind of hybrid air-earth trait in the center here, Elemental Balance. This is going to give you either increased outgoing strike damage or reduced incoming strike damage depending on your health threshold. So when you are above that 50% threshold, taking the opportunity to go more aggressive, getting that increased damage, and as you're below that health threshold, it will instead, the toad will be protecting you with that reduced incoming strike damage. Quick water break before we wrap things up with the last 3 Grandmaster traits of these Elite Specialization previews. All right, we're going to start off with Familiar's Focus. So this is going to be, as we saw, this is really going to be enhancing that Familiar's Prowess bonus to even more powerful levels. It also has this personal heal attached, so it is more like this more selfish combination of like defense and offense trait. So every time that you use a familiar skill, you will get a bit of healing in addition to that empowered familiar's prowess. So we see here Fox's prowess, familiar prowess, even more condition damage. I mean, it's just increases of everything, except the toad again is going to give you kind of that hybrid condi damage reduction and strike damage reduction instead of going a bit too crazy with the strike damage reduction number. And then the rest are just pretty solid increases. This one's pretty straightforward. You know, if you do want that kind of lower impact, lower intensity style of build, you're probably going to want to play with Familiar's Prowess, as it is just leaning into the core mechanic of the Elite Specialization, using that familiar skill as often as you can. Next up, we have Familiar's Blessing. So this is going to be more of a supportive trait. We do see some boons here. This is always going to remove conditions from nearby allies when you use a familiar skill. And then, depending on your specialized element, we see a few different boons here. Might from the Fox, Earth, going to give you protection. And then there is opportunity to apply either Quickness or Alacrity, whether you have the Hare or the Otter equipped. So we will likely see, you know, that strike, that power, quickness, DPS with the Air Hare, and more of a heal Alacrity build coming out from the Water Otter. Obviously, this can just be a powerful defensive tool in competitive modes as well, or a powerful support tool, giving that Condi lens every time they use a familiar skill, or, you know, giving some of these defensive boons, or even quickness can be a pretty powerful damage spike. And there's one final trait to talk about. It might be the craziest trait of all of them.
I think so. I think out of all the things we've shown, it is the most interesting, most ambitious.
Across all of these elite specs, maybe across all existing elite specs, could it be the craziest trait? I want to say yes, and let's just see what it does as I equip the trait and take a drink of water. So we see here that I am specialized in fire, as I have the Fire Fox. And the first thing that this trait did, called Specialized Elements, is it said, hey, why aren't you in Fire Attunement? You should probably be in Fire Attunement. The way this trait works is that you cannot leave your selected attunement, but there is some bonuses, there's reasons to do this. Are they good enough? We kind of hope so. You know, we do want to have this kind of single element playstyle enabled by this Grandmaster trait that's a little bit crazy. And we didn't want it to be like something that you had to do playing with this specialization, but if you want to opt into this as the Grandmaster trait slot, you know, you can just be locked into Fire Attunement. All of my attunements have become Fire Attunement. I can't switch out. That's not the worst thing in the world, because we see here that the familiar basic skill is going to charge more quickly now. It's only going to take 2 of these skills. I can fire off a couple skills. That's going to give me access to Ignite, and I can fire off a couple more skills, get access to Ignite again, flip over to Conflagration, and when I activate Conflagration, use it at a pretty bad time, but this is going to give you a flat cooldown reduction to all of your equipped weapon skills. So we see here, you know, let's fire off some skills. Do this again, charging up toward that Conflagration. Then we're going to hopefully set up a reasonable period of time where we can utilize this. We have all our skills on cooldown. Now we use Conflagration. Those are all reset. Now I can start counting again toward my next conflagration, toward my next ignites. And this is like a pretty powerful loop. It's not really going to be like an infinite loop, obviously, but it is going to just lean into that single attunement playstyle where you're just be charging out the familiar skill even more rapidly, recharging out skills every time you use that. And this is going to add, this is a pretty interesting trait. I don't want to call it a flexible trait because it's kind of the opposite of flexible, but there's a lot of different ideas that you can play around with here. As you can play like Scepter with Firefox, or you can play Staff with the Water Otter. I switched to the Otter and it says, hey, now you have to be in Water attunement. You're not allowed to be in another attunement. Air Hair, this is going to be that air specialized strike damage. A lot of lightning strikes, a lot of blinding flashes, maybe more gales coming to the table. You could play with Scepter, you could play with Dagger, you could play with, finding the right combination of specialized element and weapon combination. There's a lot of opportunity to play around with this, and I think we've been having a lot of fun. You can probably hear it even in my voice as I talk about this. Like, we've been having a lot of fun with this trait internally, and this is something that we want it to be good, and it might not quite be good enough yet. So play with it during the beta. Let us know. We're going to be playing with it a lot during the beta as well and iterating on this trait, but we do really like the idea of promoting this like single element playstyle in kind of an opt-in situation. It makes a lot of sense for this specialization because you are already specializing in an element. So if you really want to lean into fire, you can now do that in the most extreme way possible by playing with specialized elements. Notably, one thing I did forget to mention, because I'm just rambling on and on about.
So excited.
Just too much excitement. But when you activate that empowered skill, it is going to get you that cooldown reduction on your skills, but it's also going to trigger all the traits as if you enter that element. So that will be triggering your Sunspot here. That will be triggering, Elemental Attunement if you have it. Healing Ripple if you're in water and specialized in water. So you don't completely lose access to those traits. You just get them whenever you fire off that familiar's empowered skill. So, Taylor mentioned he's probably going to be playing around with the Earth Toad specialized elements. Maybe he has a hammer equipped to see what happens.
I think Dagger Earth is right now the best, Earth specialized elements I can get, but, I need the throughput. I need as many Toad skills as possible, and this is what that trait enables.